All right. Hi to the two of you who are here in person and everyone else who's watching afterwards. Welcome. We have this is going to be our last class for the semester. It has been a pleasure teaching all of you. So before we start, does anybody have any questions? Go ahead. Yes. Yes. So the answer is you use both always. So the question is, just because I'm not sure if it's picking up, I'm going to repeat the question. The question is, when do you use tokens and when do you use permissions? And the answer is that they do different things, and I guess I did not explain this very well. So let me just let's open our project and let's talk it through. So actually, I'm not even going to open the code yet. I'm going to talk for a second, and if my explanation doesn't work, then we'll open some code. So what is a token? A token is a string of data that gets passed back and forth with every request. Okay? It's something that gets sent from the server to the client and from the client back to the server as part of the HTTP request. The token is an encrypted piece of data that can be verified by the server. So the data can be read by server and client, but the data can't be manipulated because if you manipulate it, then the server knows it was manipulated. That's what a Oh, Karthik dropped. Okay. That is what a token is. Permissions, our permission system, which is like the permission digit and all that, is the information that we want to keep track of based on the token. So what I've got my token, which is hey, this is this user, and this is the way that I verify a user once the user's logged in, because I don't want them to have to keep logging in. Exactly. That's why we did them both at the same time, and that's why all the lectures are related, because we had to create a token. And if you watch the lectures again in order, you'll see the first thing we did was we created a token system that just had like a stupid thing that just stored like nothing, then it stored the role, and then we introduced permissions, right? Which is this is a complicated way of keeping track of what everyone is and isn't allowed to do. But the only way that that's meaningful is if we know who you are first, right? So first we have the token which proves, hey, this is who I am. And then once we have, oh, this is who you are, we can comfortably say, great, now I'm going to actually verify the permissions related to you. You are welcome. Any other questions? Okay. So we're kind of done with the back end, right? Like we've gone through permissions. There's obviously more stuff to learn about back end stuff in general, but we've done a really good process throughout this course of starting from literally an empty folder and learning how to set up a node project, how to structure it, how to add things to it, what to add to it, right? How to manage our project and like what tools we can use, what the tools mean, right? The one big thing we did not cover, which I recommend you look into on your own and you will cover in other courses and you'll definitely hopefully cover in the real world, but honestly a lot of places do not cover this as well as they should, is testing. um, so testing is where we write code to make sure that our code does what we expect it to do no matter if we change it or not. We don't have time to go into testing this semester, so we're not really going to touch it, but we are going to focus on the last thing, which is we're going to style our templates because this is a back-end course, but I don't want your websites to look ugly because you didn't learn React properly or you didn't learn some other style library. So I want you to learn how to use templates and how to actually make them look nice. The basic idea is the same way we use like Express and all of these things for backend, we can use a style library for front end. What does that mean? A style library would be a collection of CSS that somebody else has written that we can easily apply to our code. Now, there are a bunch of style libraries out there, and whatever project you're on, you'll either find the one that you're comfortable with, or you'll use a specific one if you have a mandate to. Sometimes you have a mandate to not do them at all, to write from scratch, and then you're going to have to learn a lot more about how CSS works and understand the details of it. But that is beyond the scope of this course, because that's the kind of thing you would cover in a front-end development course, which is how to write CSS. Are you guys familiar with CSS from one of your classes? Okay, so let me just show you a few. So I'm going to actually turn on my screen now, and I'm going to start showing you a few different CSS libraries. But if you guys know how to write CSS, you understand the basics of what we're doing. The point of doing something like this, though, is just to do a lot of CSS quickly, or to not have to think about the CSS as much as we might otherwise. So we've got Tailwind, we've got Bootstrap, and I should have material UI. Sorry about the baby in the background. I'm moving out of this apartment, so somebody is coming, so there are people here viewing it, which is where the baby noise is coming from. So Material UI actually has like React components and is a more complex thing, and I just wanted to bring it up because there are a couple of libraries out there that exist specifically if you are. There are a couple of libraries out there that aren't just like, oh, some basic styles, but actually give you full-on components with like technological functionality that you would expect as part of their overall functionality. And that is what something like Material UI would do. Now, the thing to keep in mind about that is these have a little bit more work to set up, and these work with the idea of components, so they'll work with sometimes they'll even work with other third-party things, and they'll work with like Express or a bunch of other tools in more depth, but these are going to be very robust. So we can take a basic look at what something like, for example, using Material UI for our purposes looks like, right? So boot, right? And it's actually running npm install and installing it in our application. We don't want to do a full server-side install over here. Instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to Instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using something a lot simpler. We're going to be using Bootstrap or Tailwind. I will let the people who are here decide. If you have an interest in either, let me know. Would you prefer Bootstrap? Would you prefer Tailwind? Or do you not care? One for Bootstrap. Kartik, Maria, Bootstrap or Tailwind? Bootstrap? Great. We're learning 2 out of 3 voted. All right. All right. So Karthik is saying that he's used Bootstrap before. Honestly, because you've used Bootstrap before, that's a good reason to use Tailwind instead because it always pays to learn something new if you're learning something, right? You have a teacher here, you're learning something, it might pay to learn something new instead. But let's let's just do this. Let's just do Bootstrap. All right, we will use Bootstrap. Um, So I've got icons, I've got themes. I would like to confirm that we are on the latest version here, 5.3.2, and I'm just going to make sure that Bootstrap, because it has been a while since I've had to do this. So I'm going to look at Bootstrap repo on GitHub, and I'm just going to check that Bootstrap is still actively developed. Yeah, so Bootstrap was last updated yesterday. It is still actively maintained. That's a good sign. It's still a big part of the industry. So we can justify, oh yeah, last release was 2 weeks ago. So we can easily justify using it. So what is CSS? You guys are familiar with CSS, you've used it before. You know that CSS is just a file which is a collection of styles. Those styles are organized into things like classes, right? And we can reference those, and in order to access those styles, we can reference those classes. Now, when we use something like CSS, when we use something like Bootstrap, what we do is we just need to include we need to include the Bootstrap CSS library, and then we can start. So if we take a look over here, you see you got some here. Actually, you know what? Let's download the examples and we'll take a look at the examples for Bootstrap, and then we'll talk about how to incorporate these examples. So we're going to start with cloning this library, which is the library of Bootstrap examples. Yes, I'm aware what that does. Open. Nope, does not let me do that. I should not have done that there. My mistake. Let's try that again. Uh, let's just do this much simpler. We're going to go to the examples, and we're just going to download this repo as a zip file. And I will unpack this zip file. Oops. I click extract all. So I'm going to extract my zip file here. All right. Now I've got examples.me, examplesme, and I'm going to cut that. I'm going to put that up one file. And this is just a cool trick, by the way. If you have a folder, if you have two folders with the same name, like one inside the other, if you cut the inner one and paste it where the outer one was, it'll just basically remove the outer one because it moves the contents into the new one. If that did not make sense, do not worry about it. It's not on any tests. We're going to look at starter, right? What were we looking at? We were looking at examples/starter. So examples/starter index.html. Actually, let's just open this whole folder in Visual Studio Code. So we're going to start this whole folder in VS Code. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's clear. I've got an index. Well, before we even do anything with this, because this is a style library, right? Because this is something visual, let's actually look at the visuals of it. I'm going to also open this HTML file in my browser. All right, now I can see what this looks like. So now that I know what this looks like, I can go back to now I can go back to VS Code, and I can open my HTML, and I can figure out like what correlates to what I'm looking at, right? So for example, this whole nav bar relates to this nav bar, right? And if I want to figure out how to add specific elements inside my nav bar, I would look inside the nav. Now I've got a container, which is my5, and then I've got a HR, right? And then I've got this hello world. So the hello world is inside of an H1. And then we've got this box with some text in it, which has got two different paragraphs. One is this FS5 class, and then I've got a column 1 MI4 HR. Do you guys know what the HR tag is? All right, how in depth do I need to go? Do you guys know CSS in general? Do you guys know HTML? If I say the HR tag, do you know what that tag is? Because it's an uncommon tag. That's why I'm asking. Do you know the HR tag? What does the HR tag do? No, I'm asking specifically, what does this tag do? It draws this line. HR is how we divide is how you is a tag to draw a line. Column 1 means it's only one column wide, and MY4 is 4. So before I get into too much depth about how Bootstrap works in general and how Bootstrap organizes things, the first thing I want to point out is you'll notice that we've got this href up top, this link up top, which is actually how we're getting the style sheet. And you'll see that there's just a standard style sheet up here that is being loaded from the cdn.jsdeliver.net. And what this is instead of having to download the file locally onto our server, and then whenever anyone wants to use that file, they access the server and they access the file. They have to download the file from our server, right? Because the CSS is going to be a separate file. Instead, we use the CDN, which stands for Content Distribution Network. And multiple websites using the same source means that once the browser downloads that source once, the browser doesn't have to download it again. So if I use Bootstrap and you use Bootstrap and a user comes to my site, says, oh, the browser's like, oh, I need to go get this CSS file. But then they go to your site, they're like, oh, wait, I already have that CSS file. I don't have to download it again. That is why we use CDN. CDNs also have a lot of logic on the back end about distributed networks and how their servers are organized, so that at the end of everything, we end up with a lot of, excuse me, so that we get data really quickly from them. And like, if you want to Google CDNs and look into what they are and what they mean, they stand for, I believe, Content Distribution Networks. Let me just verify that really quickly. But if you look up a CDN, it's CDN content, sorry, Content Delivery Network. All right, you can look up like Cloudflare is a great source. Cloudflare is one of the is a company that makes a software that basically protects servers. So anything related to like servers and like server organization, things like that, they'll explain it because I'm pretty sure one of the services that they offer CDNs. Yeah, we can check their products. Yeah, I believe that they offer for performance. They help protect things, and they also offer CDNs, which is a whole other conversation. I'm not going to explain it in too much depth, but like if you look up CDN, Content Delivery Network, you can look up something like Cloudflare, and they will explain it really nicely. The important thing though is you'll notice that I'm never actually going to I'm not going to download our CSS. I'm not going to download Bootstrap and put it into our project. Instead, I'm going to put this link into the header. So I'm going to copy this link, which is the link I need, and I'm going to paste it into, where's my project? Here's my project. We're going to go into, and because we have our parts, because we already have a header file, right? Which is already where I'm storing my styles because it's included in every one of my, every one of my template files. I don't have to worry about anything. I could just include this link, and I now automatically have Bootstrap in every single one of my pages. This is another advantage of templating and of using the parts. The way we use them is when, oh, I have to add some file to my whole site. I have to add a style library now, one link, and I don't have to think about any other pages. We're done. The other thing I'm going to add I'm going to add this CDN link to the foot, which is there is a JavaScript library. There's a JavaScript file as well. And the reason for the JavaScript is, sorry, this is going to drive me crazy until I fix it. So one moment, please. Preferences, settings, word, on, save, close. There we go. Okay. Uh, The JavaScript part of this is used for some fancy like animation related things. A lot of it can be done with CSS these days, but Bootstrap has been around for a very long time and does some really complex stuff. So some of it is still done with JavaScript. And we might see some examples by the end of class, we might not. So let us boot up our site and let's start adding some things to our site. I think the first thing we're going to add is we're going to add a navbar. So what do we have to do? First thing we have to do is we have to do npm run dev. In the current project I'm working on, I'm using at work, I actually use yarn instead of npm, so it took me a second to remember that we are using npm for this. Now, you can see that our project is already different. I don't know if you remember what our project used to look like, but the font has changed. This is because Bootstrap just defaults to having the font different. You also notice that this is much more to the corner because Bootstrap gets rid of a lot of default spacing and things like that. Sorry, okay, so that, and then that. All right, so now I can switch back between these two really quickly. Just to show you what I mean, if I go header, I comment out Bootstrap, and I save it, and I reload my page, you can see how different it looks, right? And this is just by including Bootstrap, I've already added a bunch of styling stuff. And no matter what style library you use, even before you start applying the classes it wants you to apply, it will immediately give you some styling. Now, the one thing I really would like to add in this class, I think it would probably be the most important thing for us to add, is I think we should add a nav bar to our home. I think we should add a nav bar, and we can either add it to the body, we can either add it in our header, or we can add it as its own part. And I think we should add it as its own part, because I think we're going to want to potentially pass in some arguments to it. For now, let's start by just including it in the header file. So we're going to add a nav, right? And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go back to my example. Oops. I'm going to go back to my example, my Bootstrap example here, and I'm going to look at the classes that they apply to the nav bar. And I'm going to take those classes and I'm going to start by just applying all of them, right? I'm going to close nav, and then I'm going to just add a container. So a lot of the way Bootstrap is structured specifically is Bootstrap uses a lot of containers to apply its styles and to organize things. So you'll see that there's going to be a lot of divs with like a container and a few other things and things attached to it. Now, if you weren't just copying a, now if I wasn't just copying a template that already existed, but I wanted to apply my own, I wanted to like work out my own stuff, what would I do? Right? That's a fair question, right? What would I do if I wanted to add my own specific flares to Bootstrap? How would I like know what to do? We would open the Bootstrap docs, right? And there's a lot of rules about customization, and then it breaks down all of the components. It breaks it down into layout, followed by some content, which is like typography and images and things like that. These are the basic functionality that it has. Then it goes on to forms, right? And it talks about form control, and it gives us examples of any given one. We've got select, right? And I go back to my overview. I can look at, hey, I can look at, this is what a form looks like in Bootstrap, and we're eventually going to open forms. And if I go back to containers, it'll explain it's got like a bunch of different container classes, and it explains at a given screen size, what is this container, how much space does this container take up, right? We've got container fluid, we've got container XL, right? Large, extra large, medium, small, medium, large, extra large, and double XL. Those are the sizes, and then we've got container fluid, which will take up the whole space no matter how big it is. And a lot of learning how to do this is just understand how CSS works and just get in the flow of it, which is a separate thing from like everything else we've done. But using a library like Bootstrap will just make it a lot easier to do. You can compare it to the grid example, right? And like here, it actually shows you, oh, this is what, if you added these tags to this class, this is what it looks like, right? It talks about it, the gutter system, in general, what it would look like on a tablet, two nested columns inside of one big column, and like you can have you can do a lot of crazy stuff with this concept of containers. And we'll use them as we go through it. But let's just start. We've got a container, and I've got a um. Well, I'm gonna steal this navbar, and we're gonna simplify it. So I've got my link, right, which is going to be, what did we call this project? We called it lecture 3. What did we call it inside the package? We called it lecture 3. So if we call it lecture 3, then I guess the name on the nav bar is going to be lecture 3. Right? That is the name of our website, lecture 3. So, and we're going to actually href to home. Oops. So if we go and preview our website now, which, shoot, I just closed Firefox. No, I did not. I have that open still. I go back to my home and I refresh. Now I've got lecture 3, and if I click lecture 3, it goes to home. Just to really test that, if I go to games, oops, I'm allowed to go to games. If I go to login, we know I'm allowed to go to login, right? So if I go to my login page, I can click lecture 3 and I go back home, right? So let's just add a few more of our pages, and then we'll get to cooking, as the kids say, which I'm sure is true. Could that the kids say that? So, okay. This is where, like, I would be using two screens, right? Because I do have a second screen, so I would have the navbar open up on one screen, the Bootstrap example open up on one screen, and I might even have the Bootstrap demo, which I currently have closed, that I'm going to open again. I have the Bootstrap demo opened up on the same screen, and that would give me an idea of what I'm looking at and how to use it, right? So we got the search and the search thing, right? Uh, but I do not have that here for our purposes, so instead I'm going to have to, because I want to demonstrate everything and I'm only able to record one screen at a time reasonably, I'm going to just have to swap between these two. But what I would like to do is so for example, what this button does is it toggles the navigation, but it's only if the browser is really thin, otherwise it doesn't exist. Don't really worry about that. We've got navbar collapse, right, which is navbar supported content. Disable. Okay, here's what I want to grab. I would like to grab a link. We're going to do just some basic links here. We're not even going to do navbar connects. We're going to do this basic navbar situation inside of our container. Uh, all of this is still inside the container. Yes. Okay. And I'm going to close my UL. Then inside the UL, I'm going to list some li times 3. And we're going to have login. We're going to have sign up. And we're going to have games. Right. We could go into more depth. I'm going to give a heads up now that, like, because of time constraints, we're not going to go into like crazy depth because this is the only CSS class we're doing. I'm just going to give a basic example, and you could make this a lot more dynamic. And when you submit your final projects, I'm going to expect your elements inside of your nav bars and related things to be more dynamic than what I'm presenting here. Why is this not showing yet? We'll figure that out in a moment. Uh, but for right now, I'm going to at least give you the basics to demonstrate. UL. We need nav item. And so this is going to get the class of apologies, I've forgotten how to do this. Anyway, class, oops. Class equals nav, and then inside the nav item, I put a link, And inside this link, we put and here's where I put the word login, right? And then we do navlink active, class equals navlink nav dash link active. Actually, not active, just navlink and href equals slash login. Oop. And if we refresh our page now, there we go. We've got the login page. I can click on that and it brings me to my login page. And we're just going to do this with the rest of the pages. So I'm going to add my sign up page, which is going to be class equals nav link, sorry, nav item, and then inside that, I'm going to do a space class equals nav link. Control X, Control V. And just to make life easier, let's just and now this is going to equal href equals slash games, and we're going to add, is it disabled or inactive? Refresh. Never mind. And we're just going to add one more, which is we're going to add a home link. Even though we already have the home link through the icon, we're also going to actually have a home link here. And it's just going to be, and if we refresh now, and now I'm going to add one other class. I'm going to add the class active. Refresh. All right, so now the home is the active link. Now, of course, it should not really just, the home should not be the only active link. If we were doing this properly, we would set this up dynamically so that whatever path was selected, that would decide which link is active. But we're not going into depth on that right now. We are more focused on some other things at the moment. All right. Any questions? Is it clear? Did everything I do here make sense so far? Everyone else? Yes? All right. Next thing I want to do is I actually want to fix. So the home page is a little bit of a disaster. We'll really quickly fix that, but honestly, our login page, and then we'll do our login pages and our sign up page, and we'll be done. So we'll just do those three pages. Yeah, we'll do our login, we'll do our home, we'll do our login, we'll do a sign up, and actually we'll do our home, we'll do our login, and we'll do our games. I really think that those are the three pages we should do. In order to easily do the games, I'm going to disable what I did last time. which is I'm just going to render, we're just going to say if we're going to revert a few of the changes we made, which is we're now going to let anyone access the games, right? As long as there are games in the database, if you access the games page, you will see the games, right? Which is lovely. It works. It looks terrible. We're going to fix that. That's what we're doing today. But I didn't want us to have to log in and worry about the whole login process to view the games. So, homepage. Homepage right now. So we have a nav bar. It works. It is not going to have an active link because none of our links are really appropriate. I don't like this background color, so I'm actually going to change that. So instead of navbar dark, we're going to delete navbar dark. We're going to delete bg dark as our classes here. We're going to refresh this, and navbar is by default. Wait. So if we look at, instead of looking at this, if we read the Bootstrap docs and we look at our themes, no, we're not going to really look at themes. We're going to look at examples. We're going to look at, sorry, we're going to look at docs. We're going to go down to the, let's search our docs for navbar. Oops, navbar. And color schemes. Here we go. So our navbar's got a few different potential color schemes. We're going to do, right, so this is a bottom border, border body. And this is some complex stuff. We're going to start with just BG primary, right? This is the second example, which is navbar BG primary. Navbar and BG dash primary. And we're going to refresh our homepage now. Why does it look so terrible? Because for some reason our colors are still black, right? Why are our colors black? Um, Never mind that. This is honestly a lot of what working with a library like this is until you learn it. New dark navbars, we deprecated .navbar dark, and our new favorite data vs theme equals dark. And data vs to the navbar to enable component specific color mode. New 5.2.0 navbar dash light has been deprecated. The variables are now navbar, defaulting to the light appearance, and navbar dark. So what additional CSS is going on here? Why is this looking the way it does with navbar extended algae? Let's just get rid of this and let's save. And let us Control Shift R, refresh our page. Whoops, that's a problem. Control Shift R, lovely. Why are my colors so bad? I don't know. All right, if that's how it looks good, we'll leave it like that for now. We're not going to change this too much. There we go. Navbar dark just gives us the white. There we go. All right, that looks better. Now, our home page. All right, the actual body, we want this to sit closer to the middle. Homepage, login, games. So the first thing we need to do, no matter which page we're on, is we need to just give this an overall container. So we're actually going to do this in our header again. And this time I'm going to work with my header and footer. So in my header, I'm going to add one last div over here. And it is going to be if we look at my example, so if we go back to my example and I collapse the navbar, I've got a container. And like in this case, the container is my5. So we'll explain what that means in a second, but we'll do class equals container. And we're going to do my5. dash 5. And then I'm going to delete this closed div. And I'm going to open my footer. And then at the top of my footer, after, and then just before the body in my footer, I'm going to go slash div. So I'm going to close the div tag over here. So this means that literally everything else everything in between my header and my footer is going to go from my open tag to my close tag is going to exist inside of this container that we're creating. So if I refresh now, we can see that, oh, this sits in a container, so this actually sits in a pretty nice space. Now, before I go any further, I just want to demonstrate like how big what the my5 container is and how big it is. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to lorem ipsum generator. Right? I'm just going to generate some lorem ipsum. I would like to do 5 paragraphs. Start with lorem ipsum, generate, and then I just get to copy paste this bunch of text. I'm going to open my home page now, right, my index, which is what I've been working in this whole time. I just haven't opened. That's the page we've been looking at, but I haven't actually opened it yet. And I'm going to wrap each of these paragraphs in their own p tag. Right, so whoop. There I go. Oops. Lorem ipsum is random text. The reason why we use it specifically is that it is gibberish. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make any sense. But what it is that it's actually like a variety of different text. Because if I tried to copy paste a single word over and over, it would look weird and it wouldn't give you a representation of what my styles are supposed to look like. So instead, what we do is we have a bunch of basic text. We have a bunch of random text, so I can really quickly, for any sort of style, and this is a thing that designers use, not just like in web dev, but like in any sort of graphic design, they will generate random text, which is a placeholder, but gives you a very good picture of what things will look like. Because the goal is not to be able to read the words, the goal is to be able to see what words will look like, and it needs to be a variety of words. It can't just be a single word. So, there we go. Now, there was that weird thing that we had, right? We have 2 tags here. We have the container tag, which we understand to be like, hey, this is a thing to hold stuff, and that's what orients it to the middle, and that's what gives it the bumpers on the side. Then we also have this my5 tag, right? What does my5 do? Let's look at that, right? Let's look at my-5. Right, what does my5 do? No. Is it layout, containers? Mhm. So we've got fluid containers, which is about the size of the container. And then after the discussion of containers, we've got a grid. Now, in general, what does the grid do? The grid allows us to set how much space things take up relative to each other. So I can have things that take up 1 column, things that take up 2, or things that take up 3. We used to need a library like Bootstrap. Now we do this with Flexbox by default. But you can still do it with Bootstrap. I am using Bootstrap. That's why I'm going to do this. I can do that. I'm just going to try to find this tag. Alright, my dinner was just served, so I'm going to have to stop and eat it in a second. But I'm trying to find this stupid... Alright, let's cheat. Bootstrap my-5 tag. Spacing, that's what it is. Thank you. So, M gives us a margin, P is for padding. Does everyone know what the difference between margin and padding is in CSS? What is the difference? That is correct. Padding is for inside of my element and margin is for outside of my element, right? So if we look over here, if I inspect this element, and I look at the computed, actually I look at layouts, we see that there's the element itself takes up space. Then there's the padding that takes up some space. Then there's the border that takes up some space. And then there's the margin over here. It's just going to margin on the top. So if I scroll down this a little bit, right, so we can see the word notation is the element that I'm looking at. And we can look at how notation has a little bit of space between the notation and the element above it, right? So if I use this little thingy over here, we can see, hey, notation has a bit of space above it, and, oops, has got all that additional space over there, right? A little bit below and a lot above, and the yellow part is the margin, and the purple part is the thing itself. So if I change the padding over here to 20, right? Now my purple gets bigger. And if I change my margin to, right now it's 2 REM, if I change it to 1 REM, it gets smaller. And we can talk a little bit about what EMs are or whatever it is, but the point being that the margin Y, right? Margin Y5 is just giving us a big amount of spacing on top, on left and right. So that's why it looks like this. So if I got rid of my my tag, right? If I just deleted it and I saved and I refresh this, it stays the way, oh, whoops, I edited the wrong one. If I edit the actual file that I'm looking at, right, which is my lorem ipsum, if I go back to my header and if I go to my my5 and I delete this and I save and I refresh, we see how, hey, all of a sudden it's flushed to the top, right? Why is it flushed to the top? Because Y is my horizontal, sorry, Y is my vertical and X is my horizontal. So if I do my dash 5 or dash 3 and I refresh, it moves down but not as much. And if I go back to my my-5, then everything starts a little bit down. And honestly, I don't like the 5. I think I'm going to move it up to a 3. I prefer the 3 to the 5. Boom. Okay. Basic. That is it. So now we have a nice little, now our homepage looks a lot cleaner, and all we didn't even really do anything custom to our homepage itself. Instead, what we did is we added the overall container to the nav bar. It is 7 o'clock. We've been going for about an hour. We're going to stop here. I'm going to eat dinner. So I'll give it about 20 minutes or so. And then we will come back and we will work on our next page, which is we're going to work on the sign up. And if we have the time, we will work on the games page too. All right. But honestly, looking at the games page now, there's not too much more to do to the games page. We might mess around with the table and get some details to it. Before we take the break, does anybody have any questions? All right. Then I'm going to pause the. All right. So we're back after the break, and now we are going to do the login page. So forms. There's two parts of this. We're going to do the forms. We're going to add some styles to the forms so that the forms look nice and they are formatted nicer. And then we also might add a little card. Uh, so if you've got any questions, please let me know. But we're going to take a step back here. We're going to go to examples again. And I would like to hear this example. Model title. And yes, enable no things, right? That sort of. These are called modals. Modals are little cards that are kind of like the modern version of a pop-up, but instead of loading in a separate window, they load as part of our main window, and they just show up on the big. They show up and kind of gray out the rest of the background, and usually you have to like do something to continue. That is what a modal is. modal. We're not going to use one here, but it's just important to know about as a term. So I'm going to open our sign up, not our sign up, sorry, our login. And we are going to totally change our login so that it actually looks like a Bootstrap form. So we're going to go back to getbootstrap.com with examples. We're actually going to go to the docs and we're going to go to our forms overview. Right? We get a nice little form. We're going to actually add all of these fun little details to our form. We're going to start changing our tags and stuff. And this is like a place where Bootstrap is really going to shine once we optimize it properly. So I've already got my form with my action, right? So I'm going to keep that. Underneath it, we're going to add some stuff. We're going to add a we're going to add a div.mb3 tab, right? Sorry, mb-3. mb-3. And then inside of that, we are going to have the label, the input, and the div. Right? So we're going to add a label, an input. We're just going to have a label and an input. So what are our classes for our label? Form label. So label dot form dash label for, actually, I don't even need to do this, right? Because we already have all this stuff here, so we just have to add the things we need to add. So in this case, we need to put this inside of this nice little MB3, which is margin bottom 3, right? We're going to get rid of our BR tags now because we're not going to need them anymore. And a second div dot mb-3, right? And we're going to move this into there. And we're going to get rid of our BR, and we are going to go div dot mb-3. So we are working on our login page now. So we've added just some basic formatting around it. And we can see now it's laid out nicer. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually add the form label and form control tags. So if I go back to my web page, right, I'm just going to have to add 2 tags to each of these, right? 2 classes. So class equals form dash label. Class equals form label. Whoop. And then class equals form control for the actual input pieces. Refresh our page, and voila! Look at that. Isn't that nice? It all looks much cleaner. It's a little bit long, right? What we're going to do is we're going to wrap this whole thing in a container. We're going to make our container sit in the middle of the page so that it doesn't take up nearly as much space. Might even give our container a little bit of a background to make our form stand out, but we can see just adding a couple of basic classes makes, turn something like this into something like this. Really beautiful, really easy. And if there's like an error or something, we can even add like error tags and we can add error classes and things like that to really make it pop. One thing I would like to do is I'd like to deal with it. The first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to deal with this button. I would like to I would like the submit button, right? Instead of the class of form control, we are going to go btn-primary and refresh. Now we see this nice little button. and it's the right size that we want for a button. Problem is it's on the left, and I think it should be on the right instead. So let's just look up how to do this. Bootstrap. Um, full right. It's going to be in our utilities, containers, utilities, not containers, columns. Alignment, right? Row align item start, container text center, 103, 103, 103. Here we go. All right. Here. Column align service. So we're going to turn our form is also going to get the class of equals container. If we refresh our page now, doesn't really change much, but the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do mx, mb, mb or mx? Utilities, cutters, yeah, m mx dash 5, let's go, refresh, x dash, what's the biggest one we can do, gx star, sorry, let's just deal with the here. So just do just gonna add some custom style here to make this easy. Style max with 5em. No, not 5em. We should do this absolute value of 300 pixels. Let's say. And refresh. There we go. So max 300 pixels, and it looks a lot better. Perfect. Now, what was the other thing? The other thing is column align self end. Right. So. Container, center text, row, justify content start. Apologies, I'm not talking as much. This is a lot of like tediousness to get things to look exactly right, but even without doing any big details, this looks really sweet. This looks like what we want a form to look like. So I'm going to leave it at that because we can mess with this for another 3 hours to do some additional details. The one thing I am going to do is I'm just going to move the button to the right and then I'm going to stop. But otherwise we would be here all night. And nobody has time for that. So let's just go. Let's just go with div.row. Oh, that should not say that. That should say row. So I'm putting this in a row. And then in the row, I'm going to put this. Whoop. So if we refresh this, nothing really noticeable other than this small thing on the bottom, which honestly, we can delete this now, I think. and refresh that. Whoop, that fills up the whole thing now. And now instead of the row, we're going to do inside the row, we're going to do div.call dash to dot offset dash 10. So to explain how Bootstrap works, at its core, Bootstrap's logic relies on 12 columns. So what I've done here is I've said, hey, I'm going to offset by mb-2 refresh. Never mind. This is going to go too crazy. This is going to take way too long to figure out the precise things of, so I'm just going to leave it as is. The basic idea is that Bootstrap allows for Bootstrap primarily works with columns system, which means that which means that all those weird graphs I keep looking at are basically about, let this be like a column, let this component be 4 columns wide. So no matter how big it gets, this is divided into 12 squares, and 4 columns wide means you take up 4 out of 12 squares. That's the logic of how it works, and you can offset based on, medium, you can offset until medium or until large or until small, right? Or you can just always be a column. That is up to you. And the reason why we do that is, here we go. All right, order first, order last. Not important. All right, so got my login, got my sign up. Let's do, because login took so quick, let's just quickly do the sign ups page too. How do we do? We just add, first thing we do is we add style equals max width is 300 px. Save that, right, refresh. And then what else did I do? Actually, I'm going to open this over here so I can see what I did really quickly. And then aside from that, we have div dot mb dash 3 times 3 times 3, and I just tab that, and then in each one of these we just go whoop, whoop, Control X, Control V, Control X, Control V, and whoop, Control X, whoop, Control V, and we're gonna have to do it one more time around here. But I'll deal with that in a moment. So now I've got my 3 divs around my 3 form inputs, which have got a label. I've got an input, and I have a closed div right here. All right. Now I've got div.mb-3, tab, enter. And now we're going to do our class. So this is going to be my button dash primary, and I want to show you the different kinds of buttons, and I'm going to do that when we're done here. And for the rest of this, it's just class form control. You can just go whoop, whoop, Control C, so that I can just do and then for these, it's going to be class form label. And if we refresh that, we go back to our page now, we refresh our page, voila! Right. What's the difference? The difference is that for some reason this is login is on the login also has to get the class equals container. Save. And now if I refresh, there we go. Simple, straightforward, lovely little form. We can do a lot more with this, but we're going to leave it at that for now. Does anybody have any questions about what I did? It's basically just add a bunch of classes, and because the style already exists, I have to do minimal work and I get all this nice stuff done. All right. Um, games page. Let's see what we can do with the games page. Well, first thing we can easily do is we can put our, so we're going to close this, we're going to close our index, we can close our header and close our footer. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to open the games page. And I'm going to wrap the whole, I'm going to turn, actually I'm going to wrap this in a div.container tab. Just do, oops. Enter, and then we just do Alt, and that just goes down to the bottom, and we save. And we do Shift Tab over there. All right, save that, refresh. Moved over slightly, not fully, but it's a start. Now, let us take a look at what else we can do. We can open, get bootstrap.com, we can go docs, and we can look at table components. Right? Content tables. So, table is supposed to take a class of table. Table space class equals table. And now if we refresh that, whoa, that looks very different, right? It is overwritten our custom CSS, and we've got a bunch of other stuff going on. But for starters, it is overwritten our custom CSS, so we can get rid of it. But let's look at what other classes we can add. Now, they want scope to be, they want it to be scope column for column, and then scope row if there's a scope for the row. There's also a bunch of variants, which are different colors that we can use. And there's also striped rows. Striped rows is something we're going to want to do, right? So let's go back to our, all right, there we go. So let us go back to our table. So first off is I'm going to go into my, I want to comment out this container and see how much our container is actually helping us right now. Yeah, it's not really doing anything, so we're going to toss it. I have gotten used to using containers because back in the day you needed containers for everything in Bootstrap. That is no longer the case, so we are not going to use it. Now I'm going to go into my style.css for the style that I wrote, right? And if you remember, most of it was written for our table. But since we're using custom table now, we don't need any of it. Because we don't need any of it, we're going to delete all of it, and we're going to refresh. And now we actually get to see the proper styling of the way Bootstrap is using it without any of our styles accidentally overriding things. I'm going to leave my footer and that stuff in there for now, but so What can we do with our table? We can add stripe. We can make our table a stripe table. So we're gonna add table dash striped. And if I refresh this, ta-da! This is easier to read now, right? I've got my headers and I've got my columns and I've got my rows and they look pretty slick. Let's take a look at what else we can do. Classes, right? Table dark, table striped columns, right? Table success, table striped. We can do a lot of other stuff. We can do hoverable rows. Honestly, table hover, right? Hoverable rows seems nice. So I'm actually gonna turn off night mode so that it's more obvious what's happening here. Because a lot of the styles are like, oh, here's what it looks like dark, but the reality is that I have dark mode on, so everything was dark, which is a silly design, but such is life. Table hover. Table dash hover. Now if we refresh, and if we hover over a specific element, we can't really click it. We can't click on them. That's a separate issue, right? We might want to make them clickable, but we can at least let users hover over them so they can more clearly see what's going on with the given table if they want to focus in on it. And I've got my table hover and my table striped, right? And we can even do this for table active, which is a specific column is active or specific cell is active, right? We can do table bordered, which honestly might look a little better. If we go back over here, we can do table stripe, table hover, and table bordered. Yeah, I think the additional border looks nice, but we don't want it to be our ugly solid black one. I think it works best if it's just there. And then a nice little one, and we can do border primary, and we can set the color of the border. We can do borderless, which would have 0 borders whatsoever. We can do is table small, right? Which is we can shrink our table down a little bit. We can do table group divider, right? We can divide groups of our table. Vertical alignment, we can play with a lot of different stuff here, right? We can align things differently. I think that the last thing I'm just going to do is I'm going to add table small and see what happens. So if we go back to this just to see what table small, it's just table SM. I go table dash SM, save and refresh, and it just shrinks everything down a bit. Honestly, if this wasn't the only thing on the page, I might leave table small. But because we have other stuff on the page, I think I'm going to refresh. I'm going to leave the big table. Also, like I like hover, and hover is cool, but hover makes people think they can click on it. So we're going to remove the hover as well, so it doesn't hover anymore. But there we go. We've got like this whole nice new setup, and all we have to do is just add a few simple um, things slash game slash 5. Oops, 404 not found. We can see how because of what we did to our templates, even the pages that we haven't touched, because we touched our header and our footer, and this is a nice thing about templates, we don't have to remember all the other pages. They're just immediately and easily useful. So slash games slash 3, let's say. Yeah, there we go. So once again, this looks terrible, and if we wanted to, we could mess around with this. And honestly, if I was going to mess around with the game specifically, I would look at a card. So if you look at a card is a way to leave everything in a locals, is to have things in a local location, like this, and we can have some like it's got a title and a subtitle, and we can even have descriptions, or we can have images on them. Like they are some pretty complex things, and they are like nice ways to do a lot of interesting stuff with some basic element, and often that is what gets used for a lot of different things. You'll have like a modal that's like styled like a card, or you'll style a card inside a modal. So the modal will mean the pop-up, and then the card itself will be that. Or if you're looking at like a large list of things, often they'll use cards to represent those things. All right. Just to look at a few other random elements, a carousel. This is one of the examples that uses JavaScript, but a carousel is a way to slide through like a slideshow basically, and it can have a bunch, and it'll have some logic built into it as well as a bunch of like, you can have the indicators with the thing on the bottom, and this does require, as I said, a little bit of CSS magic and some JavaScript magic as well. You have a close button. Drop downs we've seen, modals we've discussed a little bit, right? That they're like these little pop-up windows. We've got navs and tabs, which are other navigational things. We've got scroll speed. What is a scroll spot again? Oh, this is just a technique to keep track of where things are based on what's available. We've got our progress bar. Progress bar being a just a bar with a specific with a second bar inside of it, and the outer bar is going to be the placeholder of the whole thing, and then the inner bar you set the width of a percentage. And so if you're using this in something like React, you would set this as a variable, and then that variable would update as things go on. But we can even do this with vanilla JavaScript, right? Where like every second that ticks, we increase by 1% or something. Um, and you know, Bootstrap is really good about having some very cool and powerful things. And as you, yes, please, that is why we're here. So you're looking for the for absolute nav bars is the question. So the question is about, hey, how do we have an absolute nav bar that stays on the page? There is a Bootstrap example with an absolute nav bar. If I believe if we go to the examples, and I'll let you look at it in detail on your own time. But if you look at headers, there should be an example here of a. There used to be an example at least of absolute nav. Yeah, sticky. That's what they call it. Yes, thank you. Sticky footer and sticky header. That's what they use. But the other question is about if you want a little, let's say, if you go on a website and like they have that little annoying thing in the corner that's like a little circle that says click this to open to chat with one of our representatives, and then you actually end up chatting to a chatbot for an hour and a half. Yes. So that is the way that that is done is that is an overlay. It usually gets the Z index of like the last Z index. Okay, so you were dealing with a situation where, like, for example, this. I know, no, no, I know, no, no. So you were at one point dealing with a situation where you had a nav bar like this one, and you also had like a little sticky in the corner, and when you would open the sticky, that would interact with the nav bar. There's a good chance that the reason why that was happening, and this is like some deep CSS stuff, this is like CSS minutia details, but basically, there's a good chance that that you were, one of them was like absolute, but in like a weird way. Where really what the position of a nav bar, if you want it to be sticky, should just be absolute top zero. But if you're playing with like other additional things, like if there was like a negative effect, or if the other one it like inserts a second box into it, it ends up being like a giant headache. Honestly, those are the kinds of things that are like very specific to like, hey, this is what we are working on, and like I've come across this particular issue here. The solution is understand the basics of CSS well, because if you understand the basics of CSS, you will continue to go back to that. So what do I mean by the basics of CSS? So understand what a block is. Um, Basically, understand flexbox, understand block, understand how those things work. If you want a no. I know you know about that, but do you know what that actually means? Right? Yeah, I'm not saying that I don't think you should. I'm not saying that I think you've never heard of display flex. I'm saying that do you know what flex actually means? Right? So if we do a search over here for flexbox in CSS tricks, right? Direct link. Where is it? Is it CSS tricks? No, this is not going to answer what. Where is that? Flexbox. There used to be a really good article. Here we go. This article, for example, is an amazing detailed article that explains top to bottom what a flexbox is, how it works, when to use it, how to use it, why to use it, what all your options are, what the logic of it is, like all those fun details, right? And it explains this stuff really, really, really well. And I highly recommend you read this article if you want to learn about. I'm going to share it here in the I'm going to share it here in the chat, and you can look up just CSS tricks flat flexbox, right? Or you do css-tricks.com/snippets/css slash a guide to flexbox, and you'll get the details of that. And this will be like a really good, this is a really good article on Flexbox, but there's like something even more basic, right? Which is if you look up CSS grid layout guide, case sensitive, like these are going to be CSS tricks is going to be a good resource for you. Like explaining a lot of just the fundamentals of different like grid layouts, right? And explaining that in depth, as well as just a lot of like little tricks, like how to draw certain things and understanding those, right? Like all these sorts of little snippets, like the stitched, for example, right? Now that effect works. But it's also, I also mean like understand if you're going to use a property, and like especially nowadays when you're going to be using AI for a portion of your code, right? You're going to be coding with AI. Make sure you understand exactly what a property does, right? Comment it out, see if commenting it out destroys anything. But even if it's not commented out, you should be able to explain it. There's an old thing called rubber duck debugging. Rubber duck debugging, right? And this is has a Wikipedia page and everything. The idea is basically there's literally you take a rubber duck, and there's some offices that just have a bunch of rubber ducks around. But the idea is you take a rubber duck, you sit it down next to your code, and you explain every line of code to your rubber duck. If you have a cat that will sit still and listen to you, I recommend using a cat instead. But cats do not always have interest in code, I have found. Um, but yes, but like on a serious note, do this. Do You should always be able to do this with any of your code that you have worked on. You should be able to explain what your code does. If you cannot explain what it does, if you do not understand what it means, look it up. Spend the extra half hour and understand what, right? Let's take something simple, right? Like you guys have been writing CSS for a while, so I'm sure that you have seen CSS display property, right? You've written display block, inline block, none, flex, and grid, right? You have written, I'm sure, at least a couple of these, if not all of these, at some point in your life. Yes? Good. Do you know what that means, though? No, it's you use this to make your things in line or not in line. But what does it mean? What does display block mean? Right. You just mess with it until it like looks good. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of days when I do that too. I'm not like this is not me picking on you, and don't worry, whoever I'm talking to now, your voice is not should not be saved in the recording. So don't worry about that. Um, but I'm trying to make a point. My point is this is a fundamental that we don't pay attention to, right? You guys did a very basic CSS course. You guys did a front end course, right? And your teacher probably spent a lot of time on like HTML tags and what they are and how to write your tags and all that jazz, right? But how much time did you spend understanding what a display is? What does display mean? Okay. And you should also understand that display is not always necessary. Because here's the thing, what display does, okay, so we're going to talk about Flex and Grid are modern additions, and Flex and Grid are about flex blocks and grids. And those are the CSS articles I explained to you before. But in general, what display does is it says, what should I treat this element as? Now there's three initial options before we start talking about everything else. There's block, inline block, and none. Now, did you know that some elements already have those properties naturally? So there are some HTML tags that are already blocks or are not blocks. There are some that are blocks or not block or non-blocks or inline blocks by default. And the idea is basically what this does is it's about allowing how is the property treated as something that has weight and something that deserves space to itself, or is it something that I want to leave alone? Right? So in this example here, you can see that the tag that I'm editing the display on is the dotted tag, right? So if I do display block, then this takes up a whole row. If I do inline block, then this takes up exactly as much space as it needs. And then the text after it is in line, even though this takes up space. If I do display none, then it literally disappears and takes up no space. If I do flex, then it takes up the full space, but also the elements inside it act differently. And these elements are adjustable and they will adjust based on the size of my screen. So if I make my screen smaller, right, with a flex box, we can shrink and draw, right? We can change the way the actual screen goes. And if I hit like this, yeah. And then if we go back to that and we go to display grid, we see how the elements inside of it are different. And that's what and this is just one basic tag that we use a lot, but we don't ever really stop to think, what does this actually mean, right? It's just, oh, I have to display block, otherwise it doesn't, and like, oh, now it works. But if we spend a minute thinking about, oh, what does this display property mean, then then I get the results I would want in a better way. And look, I do this too sometimes. I'm not like I don't like I'm not picking on anyone. I genuinely this is a thing that programmers do. Unless you are like a front end specialist, like a CSS specialist, this is where we're at. Like this is just how we program. We don't have enough time to think about everything. But I want to highlight that CSS is as important, if not more important, than a lot of other things that we do. Then right, it's just as important as a lot of other tools we use. In the same way we understand how a for loop works and we understand our data types and we spend time understanding, protected things and we understand in, inheritance and things like that, and we understand accessors and we understand, data type conversion, even in a language like JavaScript, which doesn't do it, which does it manually. It's really important to think about like when I'm using CSS, think about it, right? All right, before we go, does anyone else have any questions? Happy to. And by the way, these two sites, whoops, I'm gonna shift the camera back. Excuse me. These two websites, the Mozilla Developer, the MDN, which is the Mozilla Developer Network, I believe is what it stands for. It's the Mozilla, which is the company that makes Firefox. Their developer documentation for JavaScript and for a lot of different languages, right? For HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and for like all the fundamentals of web stuff, like including HTTP, which we've spoken about before, are really, really, really robust, and I highly recommend them. If you have any questions, like look there if you're not sure. And honestly, if you want to good exercise yourself during the summer or like when you're studying in general, you could always just spend like a couple of minutes a day, pick one basic property of CSS and just read the docs on it. Read Mozilla and read W3 schools. And just like read what it is, right? The display behavior type of the type of rendering box of an element, right? If you're not sure what that means, try to figure it out, right? And mess with it and see how it can be messed with and like read through the details of it, look at the demos, right? Mess around with the demos, see how things change, see what happens, right? Display, we can do there's a bunch of other tools we can use for this in general. Um, if nobody else has any questions, then I think we'll leave it there. It's been a pleasure getting to know you all. I still have to grade your second assignment, I think. No, I graded the second assignment, right? It's just the final project left. Yeah, so it's just the final project left. I will grade it once you hand it in, which I think it's due in like a week or two. I'm not sure. But good luck with that. Between now and then, or even afterwards, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Omnivox. I will make myself as available as I can. And have a great summer.